Court is handling their cases.
These are extraordinary times for Africa. Its evolution, even at the level of this organization, has knitted together a population with a history of pain and suffering. But if that would have cowed them, it instead fired up a new generation of leaders, steering change at the heart of the very organization meeting for the very first time under such a thought-provoking topic.
I wish to note that 34 member states of our union joined the ICC, perhaps fully convinced that the organization would promote the cause of justice with a sense of impartiality and fairness. The practice so far, however, leaves so much to be desired. On a number of occasions, we have dealt with the issue of the ICC and expressed our serious concerns over the manner in which the ICC has been responding to Africa's considerations. The double standards that both the United Nations Security Council and the ICC have displayed with regard to the AU's request for deferral for prosecution in a number of cases has been particularly worrisome.
This is a clear departure from the past for the continent of President Jammeh. His colleagues, heads of state, had hastily signed off for a court that came back to hound them in total disregard for the immunity of a sitting head of state. The International Criminal Court is sitting on 8,000 alleged war crime complaints filed from around the world to focus in just 6 countries, all of them African.
From the beginning, I stood against it. That we Africans approve anything that the West bring before even knowing what it is all about. So I told them that we have to be very careful that this penal court, International Criminal Court, cannot be used against us. But then, as a continental organization, they say, oh, we must sign, we must ratify, it is in Africa's best interest because we have some countries harboring rebels against others, and then they cited the case of Sierra Leone and Liberia and others. I said, okay, but let us know all what it entails before we sign up to it. Then the majority signed. I'm always seen as anti-West. I'm not anti-West. But we have been colonized for so long and we have been taken for granted. The West decide what they want for us. They decide to send us a bus, and all Africa has to say, go in. And then when you enter, you realize that you are going to a desert, and you say, what are we doing here? So I tell them, before you enter the bus, know what the destination is.
The one-day summit was convened at the African Union headquarters in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa to devise an African response to the International Criminal Court. The issue of mass withdrawal was substituted for something more defensive in nature, buying the idea of the Gambian leader that Africa should remain within the framework of the Rome Statute to fight its case.
I don't think we should withdraw, because all the cases that are before the ICC, except for Bashir, were reported by African governments to the ICC. The ICC will not come to the Gambia and arrest somebody without us inviting them. So, the case of Laurent Gbagbo, he was arrested by the current government and handed over to the ICC. So also are other people that were reported by regional governments. The case of Kenya, when they were proposing that the either should be reported to the ICC, I felt that that was going to be a disgrace, because the ICC cannot be a solution to our internal problems. But they referred the matter to the ICC. Now it happened that God decides. Despite all the reference to the ICC, the case was on, they were investigating. The ICC would not also take a case to court unless they complete their investigation. Should we withdraw? ICC didn't come to Kenya for the case. They were invited by the government of Mwai Kibaki and the Prime Minister, Raila Odinga. So there is no case, as far as I'm concerned, apart from that of Bashir of Sudan, that an African government didn't refer to the ICC. This is the situation. Now, if you withdraw from the ICC, it does not free you from the ICC. Why? Because there are 2 procedures. Either the AU refers the matter to the Security Council or to the ICC, or an African government refers the case to the ICC, or the West will refer the case, they dominate the Security Council, refer a head of state to the ICC. And so whether you leave or not, the jurisdiction, you cannot escape the jurisdiction of the ICC. So I think we are better off staying in the ICC and fight our case than withdraw where we'll be wanted and we have no voice.
But the final communique issued at the end of the session highlights some level of frustration within the AU membership. It is now an open secret that the 34 signatories to the Rome Statute in 2002 have become wary of the situation, and there indeed exists, especially now, a great level of mistrust between Africa and the European-funded project at The Hague.
In this regard, we have reaffirmed the principles deriving from national laws and international customary law by which sitting head of state or government and other senior state officials are granted immunities during their tenure of office. Accordingly, we have agreed that no charge shall be commenced or continued before any international court or tribunal against any serving heads of state or government or anybody acting or entitled to act in such capacity during his or her term of office.
I think it's a long overdue debate. This discussion with the ICC, or especially by the ICC, should have actually taken place many years ago, because Africa has a very good case on this. The ICC is an overwhelmingly European-funded, European-driven, and European-directed organization focusing just on Africa, just on black Africa. The ICC, in effect, is an instrument of European foreign policy. And the result of the ICC's activities within Africa has been to destabilize the continent. It hasn't brought justice, it hasn't brought peace, it's brought more conflict.
In the wake of the decisions taken in Addis, leaders of the continent are seeking to complement the role of the ICC by strengthening and expanding the work of the African Court on Human and People's Rights to try international cases in pursuit of African demand for justice. Perhaps the most important outcome of the emergency session is the dispassionate discussion that ensued in redirecting the course of the court the United States have come to describe as a travesty of justice, even where it uses it as a leverage against African leaders. Abdunjai, GRTS.
The Vice President and Minister of Women's Affairs recently joined ministers from the continent to adopt the draft African Regional Conference on Population and Development report in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. The gathering, which attracted constant media attention, seeks to find solutions to population issues in Africa and how member countries can jointly find common solutions to meet the Millennium Development Goals. Aissatou Mane has details of the opening ceremony presided over by Dr. Aissatou Njai Seydi and her Ethiopian counterpart.
Representatives of 52 nations attended the experts meeting with participants drawn from regional and national experts in the field of population development, sectoral ministries, alongside representatives of African youths and civil society organizations. The experts meeting will assist countries share best practices, persistent challenges, emerging issues in the implementation of the program of action of the International Conference on Population and Development. ICPD was born on the African continent in Cairo 1994 with a vision for sustainable development based on rights-based approaches to population, in particular through the empowerment of women and girls.
Across the world, especially in Africa, women and girls consistently face a range of barriers to equality, such as sociocultural barriers, wage gaps, gender-based violence, early childbirth, and child marriage, among others. The poor and otherwise socially disadvantaged are further marginalized, of course, by crippling combinations of gender discrimination and poverty. Tackling the gender inequalities, of course, and these critical barriers that prevent women and girls from exercising their fundamental rights and realizing their full potentials must be at the heart of our efforts to create sustainable, prosperous, as well as resilient societies.
The high-level conference, which was jointly funded by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, the African Union and UNFPA, was meant to provide an intergovernmental platform